And we're back once again. Little break there, little break for the holiday.
Of course.
It's like a packed month for weekend holidays for us.
I know, right? We're going to be off next week also in
Next
observance
week
of
also.
the United States' Thanksgiving.
The United States Thanksgiving, and the week after that, you're on your own. I'm I'm out. I'm heading away.
Producer Ben, I don't know what to do when I'm on my own. Find a
Producer Ben,
guest.
it's your job.
Cool.
Find a new person. Welcome to GPS Live for the week of November 17th, 2023. Why did that one become a ticker? That's not supposed to be a ticker.
We'll fix it.
GPS Live for November 17th, 2023. We are here. We're back to our regularly scheduled programming, doing news roundups that we have found throughout the week. This week we found some actually really interesting stuff. So much stuff that we had to cut a few things because they were not, they just weren't interesting enough compared to everything else. But we are so glad that you are joining us. If you're joining us live, thank you so much. Let us know where you're from. Go ahead and drop us a comment. We love it when you guys participate in the conversation with us. We love highlighting your thoughts and ideas as well. And if you're watching on demand, thank you so much. Feel free again to leave some comments because we do go back and look at those sometimes and take a look at what people would like to see more of in the future. So that being said, Jonathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I actually just got back fresh in this morning from Atlanta, where if you follow not just myself, but also GuidePoint at large on places like LinkedIn, we were hosting our GPSec mini conference. We do these all over the country now. And so
I think there was just one in Columbus earlier this week too.
Columbus, Ohio, we've had one, but you can also find them in other interesting cities like Philadelphia and stuff like that. Where else, right? We have like a New York or a Boston one.
Yeah, we've got a bunch. They go on everywhere. So if you are watching and you would like to connect, look for a local GPSec near you. We host them pretty regularly. At least I feel like there's always one going on somewhere. I hear about them constantly in different areas. So it's been a good week here. I did Friendsgiving last night, so that's always fun.
It's always fun.
It's a younger group of folks that were hosting it though. So I got into the tracker for what everyone was bringing, and I was like, well, I guess I'm the dad of the group because I'm the only one who knows how to make a turkey. So, so I showed up, and my friend was like, all of these recent college graduates are so excited.
It's 30 minutes a pound, right? Is that how we do this still?
Yeah, I think something like that.
Okay.
The world of air fryers changes everything. But
cool.
Yeah, let's jump in. We've got some interesting stories to talk about this week. A few of them, some vulnerabilities that you found across the week. So we're going to go ahead and jump in with this first one. Vulnerabilities new and old. Let's start with the class action. I think that one's going to be the most interesting to start at the top.
Absolutely. So this one's a little bit of an interesting approach. Now, we're no stranger to having some kind of maybe like hardware or CPU vulnerability here on the show. We're very well aware that it happens these days. But in this particular case, we're seeing a class action lawsuit filed against none other than Intel for actually knowing and having been reported to multiple times a particular vulnerability called Downfall as far back as 2018. And the class action lawsuit is specifically saying, you have been notified, it has been discovered, and you failed to do anything in the last 5 years.
Yeah. So this is there's a group, I think, of 5 plaintiffs right now in the suit. Obviously, it's going to grow if it becomes a full class action and that's approved. But what they're alleging is that the Downfall vulnerability, which was independently, I guess, rediscovered this year, is something that they knew about for a very long time. And instead of letting people know and informing their customers that this vulnerability was present, they just released a bunch of microcode updates over time to try and slowly patch this vulnerability out of existence. But what they're alleging in the lawsuit is that while they left people with vulnerable CPUs if they weren't applying those microcode updates, but they left them with very vulnerable CPUs because this is not a great vulnerability to have on your system. But apparently, that those microcode updates slowed down processing power by up to 50% for like regular, ordinary computing tasks. So essentially, what they're alleging is that not only did they fail to disclose this, but also customers were left with products that they didn't buy. They didn't buy CPUs that only went half as fast as what they wanted to buy. They had those from the beginning. So this is the vulnerability itself, downfall, is also known as gather data sampling. And it affects 6th through 11th generation consumer chips and 1st through 4th generations of Xeon x86 64 CPUs, which is that's a large swath of chips to be affected. A good number of people could have those in their systems. But yeah, it is yet another vulnerability that allows an attacker to jump in there and just kind of scrape data off of your CPU's processing as you're doing it.
Now, one of the things that is particularly called out in this article come to us from TechSpot is that, if anybody recalls, at around the same time that some of these initial reports were coming in for downfall, particularly there were 2 separate reports that were received in 2018.
Yeah.
We were also in the midst of things called Spectre and Meltdown. Spectre and Meltdown flaws were everywhere, right? This was kind of the big talk of the town at the time, and so it almost feels like, look, we got all these things going on over here. Thanks for the report. We'll get to it when we get to it. And it's just, yeah, like you said, I couldn't imagine, a product being continuously vulnerable for years and years and years, and any of those potential patches that, if you even were aware to perform them, decrease the performance of the most essential performance enhancing component of your system.
Right. and I think the other thing is that the patches that they were releasing, the allegedly, according to the lawsuit, the patches that they were releasing implemented like some secret buffers related to the flawed AVX instructions that were being utilized for this. But those secret buffers were not disclosed to customers, and those left like backdoors open on these Intel CPUs that would allow an attacker to scrape sensitive information stored in RAM. So it's almost kind of this like, hey, it was reported, nothing was done about it, but what was done about it really made the problem worse on multiple levels, whether you were applying the fix or not. Yeah. So it's interesting, a new class action. We'll see where that goes. We'll see what happens there. But that, coupled with some of the new regulations that we've been seeing coming out, I would be surprised if this doesn't have some impact on disclosure regulation and law moving forward as well, if it were to be taken up in court. But I think that brings us, speaking of stuff that's been a problem for a while, let's talk about some things that are maybe fixed already. So go ahead and get us up to speed on Reptar.
I'm not going to let Intel off the hook that easy just yet, because just this week, in addition to some of their now legal challenges, Intel has, though, successfully fixed another high-severity CPU vulnerability. I mean, it's very interesting to see these approaches that are going after hardware, which is much, I don't know, in my opinion, much more difficult and an interesting approach. And so for those that collect Intel CPUs at home, you may be familiar with some of the latest, like Alder Lake and Raptor Lake and things of that nature, Coffee Lake. And so these are just a couple of the different series that were affected. And so what's happening is just like some of these previous ones, the company is actively releasing what they call their microcode updates, and they do address the issues within the CPUs to kind of tackle some of these vulnerabilities. Now, it is want to be noted that Intel does not expect this issue to be encountered by software.
Yeah, regular software shouldn't run.
Regular software, but when you can get to the level of arbitrary code execution, there is a potential for this to be taken advantage of. And I want to reiterate that this is still kind of a very strange particular one. For one thing, it was discovered by everybody's favorite Google researcher, Tavis Ormandy. But two, I love the fact that it's called Reptar because Millennial Life and Nickelodeon and Rugrats.
So it deals with redundant prefix. It's a redundant prefix issue, and what Travis Ormandy was saying is how those redundant prefixes are interpreted by the CPU leads to bypassing CPU security boundaries, and that's the reason that they don't expect this to be present in non-malicious everyday programs and software, is because non-malicious everyday programs and software do not have those redundant prefixes generally. That's been scrubbed out, right? Things are cleaned up. So this is something that you would have to be, you would have to essentially receive some form of malicious package for this to happen. So if your system is just kind of nominal everyday operations with only known good software, someone's not going to be able to jump in. At least, let's never say never, right? But someone shouldn't be able to jump in and exploit good software to get to this vulnerability. It would have to be crafted malicious packages.
Right. And just to kind of keep things kind of in the same realm of hardware, I know we still have a lot of stuff to cover this week.
Yeah.
All right, fine. I'll let Intel off the hook finally, because now we have another hardware vulnerability, but this time in AMD's EPYC platforms.
Yeah.
Equally with this last one, like Reptar, we call it cache warp, and there are patches available. Again, using stuff like microcode patching allows the owners of these CPUs to appropriately update them and help get past some of these challenges. I was kind of going through some of the technical details of it. It is a bit complex.
It's a convoluted one.
Yeah. But kind of the gist of it is that a malicious piece of software can it's kind of like a fault injection, right? Where you can modify and manipulate and change expected cache memory. So the idea is if something exists and you're constantly checking it, you can change what's expected to exist. But the worst part is that the change is a previous state. So it was expected there prior, and it's acceptable to be expected there current. And so again, using these kinds of types of attacks is going to be very complex. But knowing that they exist, somebody out there is going to be much smarter than both of us as far as researching these stuff and being able to utilize it. Just know that keeping your CPUs up to date, as weird as that sounds, is becoming just as important as keeping stuff like your operating system up to date, both on your devices, as far as laptops, desktops, and phones, and watches now too. But also making sure your applications are also updated and patched, right? Everything needs to be constantly updated, patched, and secured.
Yeah. It's from, I mean, even down to, we had stories earlier this year, right down to the motherboard, right? Everything is vulnerable because everything runs code. So that's a lot of hardware vulnerability news to get through. So let's go through a couple of ransomware stories. Now, these ones I think are pretty interesting because these are both focused on kind of new extortion tactics and or a new extortion tactic, let's say, and then what I would consider not necessarily a new extortion tactic, but perhaps an example, like trying to set an example. So we're going to start with an attack against Meridian Link that they have confirmed and has been put out there. So let's see. Meridian Link, the company, disclosed that they were and confirmed that they were dealing with cyber attack and cyber incident, and it was ransomware. And the interesting thing about this is that they went through all of the right steps, right? They acted immediately to contain the threat. They started working on an investigation to find out exactly what happened. And there's some really good news here, right? They identified no evidence of unauthorized access to production platforms, and it was minimal business interruption. But the reason that this is drawing some attention is because the group behind the attack, ALPV, which I believe also is associated with the name Black Cat, but ALPV claimed responsibility for the incident, and they took a new extortion tactic here, which is that a week after the incident, they reported it to the Securities and Exchange Commission. So the criminals themselves went to the Securities and Exchange Commission, filled out the form, the official form that is there, took screenshots of it, and then posted those screenshots and said, "Hey, we reported you to the Securities and Exchange Commission." And this goes back to a story we covered earlier this year, which are the new laws and regulations regarding the reporting of cybersecurity incidents by public companies. And those laws, those new regulations that were put in place basically said from the moment that you determine material impact from the attack, you have to disclose that to the Securities and Exchange Commission. AlphaV said, you haven't yet, so we're going to do that to try and put some pressure on you to pay this ransom.
Yeah. And yeah, from that article, right, it does definitely differ between everything from like countries. I remember India being 6 hours. It had to be reported, I believe. What was it? 4 days is what they're talking about here from the SEC. And absolutely. So now we're starting to see all kinds of different directions. First, we saw, the encryption of data. Now we're seeing the theft of data. Now we're seeing the reporting of potential criminal activity for non-disclosure. And it's just constantly stepping up its game. In fact, when we were talking about these articles before the show, it seems like these ransomware groups are really there was almost a moment there where you thought there was I don't want to say credibility, but if you paid the ransom, they did the thing, and they wouldn't, they just buzz off, right? You fix the computers, you move on, and they got their paid. But this is just one step beyond that, and just a really harsh move. But you also found another story that takes it in an extra level, right?
It takes it an extra level. But I want to finish up something really quickly with this SEC story, because I think this is the real irony of it, is that the laws that they are trying to exploit as a extortion tactic don't go into effect until next month. So this was kind of a bit of a pre-warning, right? A shot across the bow from the group AlphaV to indicate that they are willing to do this. But like you said, we have a different story to go over as well about this. Hey, ransom was paid. This attack, Dolly.com. So Dolly.com is a service that provides moving. They'll arrange moving services for you. And they were subject to a ransomware attack. And they paid the ransom. And then the information that was stolen from them was published on leak sites, and was released to the public. And that apparently includes credit card information and expiration dates and everything like that. So enough to do some pretty hefty damage to someone's finances potentially. But the ransom was paid. Dolly did in fact pay the ransom to the attackers, and then shortly thereafter they released it anyway. And the reason that they released it, I think, is pretty interesting. Now, like you mentioned, there was this kind of period of time over the last recent months and years where it really seems like ransomware was starting to treat itself like more of a business operation, and it was trying to operate almost like in a legitimate fashion within the bounds of what could be legitimate for an illegal activity. And so, if the agreed upon amount was paid, they held up their end of the deal. Now, that's not always been true. There's always been this underlying current of you just can't trust these people. But for the most part, it seemed that way, right? Like it seemed like your options were engage in like a long and lengthy process to try and recover, or just pay the ransom. And if you paid the ransom, everything would be taken care of. But what's happened here is that the ransom that was requested was paid, but retroactively, the attackers, who are not identified in any of the stories that I could find, said, "Yeah, we felt like it was insufficient. We don't think it was a generous enough payment, and so we published it anyway." And that's a really interesting angle to take, right? Like, this almost like you didn't tip us enough for the fact that we were willing to give your data back to you.
Yeah, I was joking. It feels like, when you go to the self-checkout and the tip thing comes up, but like realistically, ransomware gangs have gone from kind of like very brazen, where they feel like they're above the law, and they will ask for these amounts, and you negotiate and you pay and you move on, like you said. But I can see where you're coming up with the SEC reporting being almost only a teaser, especially from a more notoriously known group
Right.
like Alpha
Yeah.
and Black Hat. But this though with the Dolly case, just blatantly saying, you know what, I don't care. Just goes to show this aligns entirely with what the FBI here in the United States talks about, which is don't pay these ransoms. But it's a double down in the sense of one, you don't want to fund criminal activity, and then who knows where that money also goes in the long run. But now on top of the fact that we've already kind of had this sense of, well, are they going to keep up their end of the deal? That it's always been a kind of a wishy-washy position. I guess they were more reputable as far as that definition goes. But this just goes to show there's no trust among any of these thieves. It is an awful industry, and it, like if what I don't even know what to do with it.
Yeah,
It's you're just stuck.
it's a very yeah it's a catch-22 situation, fully, right? Like there's no good way to go about it. Like you kind of have to pick lesser of two evils, which is
Mhm,
from a company perspective, right? From an organizational perspective, the lesser of two evils is not paying,
mhm.
and just kind of dealing with the consequences of being victim to one of these attacks. Consequences is the wrong term there, right? But like you have to kind of deal with the fallout. Um, is that is the best avenue to take for a lot of this. The only time that I would argue that that wouldn't be probably the best case is when you have something like human lives on the line, right? If you're like a
Mhm.
healthcare institution or something like that, it might be beneficial to to go ahead and get operational as quickly as possible. But again, like you said, the FBI's guidance on this is don't pay the ransom, don't engage with the criminals, or don't negotiate with terrorists, I think is the
Yep.
long running line.
Exactly.
Um, but we have a couple other stories to cover and some limited time to do it. So
Yeah.
we're going to move on to a little bit more ransomware related stuff, but mostly what we're focusing on here is um, national, or not national, but local and international shutdowns due to
Mhm.
cyber attacks. Recently, we've seen a few of these that we've talked about, but these ones are kind of drawing a little bit of attention, Jonathan. So what's the deal?
Yeah, similar to some of the stories we ran recently, for instance, like the libraries, both in
Right.
Canada and England, that were getting hit and affecting things within the local municipalities. Right now, we're seeing a couple. One stateside here from the city of Long Beach, for instance, they did suffer a cyber attack earlier this week. And as a reaction, similar to also our next story, is shutting down portions of your IT network. We saw this kind of responsive behavior in the casino hacks
Right.
also that happened recently. And so, out of abundance of caution, this quote's coming from Bleeping Computer and a statement directly from the city. Systems will be taken offline effective immediately during the investigation and potential remediations. And it said it's anticipated to be offline for upwards of several days. That really puts a hindrance on a lot of the activities that a city's operations are trying to successfully do. A lot of that is going to be financially related.
Yeah,
For
so these
instance,
online services like being able to pay your tickets
yeah.
and be able to process bills, and something like here in Seattle, where we have like municipal power companies and things like that, right? Being able to take care of your online bills for your utilities, things like that, I'm sure is going to be. But it is important to note that they did say that emergency services remain unaffected. City email and phone systems are expected to remain available throughout. So the vital core services,
Mhm.
things that are going to really, truly, like I said earlier, be keeping people alive, right? Your emergency services, your ambulances, your police, things like that. Those are still available to folks.
Absolutely.
It is not confirmed whether or not this is a ransomware incident, though patterns would kind of indicate that it potentially is. There's not also a confirmation of if data was stolen, but again, if it is ransomware, it is very likely that data was stolen. Um, and no one has claimed responsibility for the attack yet.
Right.
But internationally, what we're looking at is DP World is the largest shipping
operator.
port operator. There we go.
Yes.
My brain was trying to come up with a term there. The largest port operator in Australia has suffered a ransomware attack, and the response was to pull the cable. Right, they just went entirely offline to protect their infrastructure, which shut down operations at major ports in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Fremantle. So that completely shut down their operations last week on Friday. They disconnected the internet to stop everything entirely. They have announced that as of Monday, limited operations are back. Import and export has resumed at Brisbane and Fremantle. And Sydney and Melbourne are only accepting imports. Now, the interesting thing about this one is the timing. We are coming into Christmas season, so affecting import and export of goods is a huge hit economically as we enter this phase where like people are looking to get gifts, things are being shipped in, things are being shipped out.
Absolutely. And so a lot of the details coming to us from the Australian Signals Directorate, also known as the ASD. They've released some initial reports also around cyber threats, especially that's happening in Australia. For instance, they're saying that just last year alone, the agency responded to 143 incidents at critical infrastructure entities, such as ports like the one from this article, which happens to be up from 95 instances the year previous. So we're not just seeing an increase in cyber attacks across the board, which we can all kind of assume is the case, but particularly against critical infrastructure like these ports. And so this kind of thing is absolutely, devastating to it. One of the other things is that the attack surface, like you mentioned, is so broad, and when something affected to any of these connected systems, whether it's a third party, whether it's port infrastructure itself, it's going to have a massive downstream effect, right? And so, as you mentioned, right, it's about the time when stores are starting to stock up for shopping season, right? In the United States, we call Black Friday, which is literally a week from now. And if the stores aren't stocked from the containers that are coming into our shipping ports, then there will be a significant loss in sales, and that kind of spending affects the entire country as a whole. For instance, you were calling out, a number of containers, right? There was stuff like stuck, right?
I'm sorry. There was stuff like, stuff stuck. Okay.
Yeah.
I had some auditory processing there. It sounded like you said stuff like stuff. And I was like, yeah, stuff is indeed stuff, Jonathan.
They were saying that there's like what 300
containers stuck
at any given point. Yeah, just stuck kind of off the shore. And so there's a lot of businesses that are waiting on this stuff down the line. And so critical infrastructure like this, we've talked about utilities as far as power. We talked about water. You can also kind of assume some of this falls under stuff like plane and train and automobile, but now we're also seeing shipping lines, ports, import, export, all kinds of things of that nature being disrupted.
Yeah. So, as we enter the holiday season, this is a critical time for cybersecurity to kind of close out the topic here. Criminals know that this is the time where people are going to be probably understaffed a little bit, right? People are going on vacation, people are taking time off. We're also all very distracted. So at a time like this, paying attention to cybersecurity in your organization is going to be critical and paramount. But that brings us to the end of our time for this week. So there will be no GPS Live next week. That will be another holiday break. But thank you so much for joining us this time. Again, if you are watching on demand, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. Until next week, I have it and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you all next time.